You have things. Oh, that's not very good, is it? Let's shift that back a wee bit. Oh, no, that's not sitting well at all. Give me an ink of a second there. Yeah, so these are still quite far out. Or maybe if I expand the video. There we go. That's lovely. That's all hokey pokey. So obviously, if you're looking at some fine Halloween pickups, then you couldn't go wrong with things like The Eaters by Pete Milligan and Dean Ormston, which is apparently the conclusion to what was going to be Bizarre Boys by Pete Milligan and Grant Morrison and Jamie Hewlett, all those go when they discovered a weird porn comic in India. And of course there's an exceptionally scary story, sensational Spider-Man, the death of Gwen Stacy, and welcome one and all, if you will, to the return of the greatest show in fandom, Mondo FunnyBooks. Welcome to Season 2. This is the prequelling. Why is it the prequelling? Well, because it's horror season, isn't it? If there's a thing we've come to learn about the horror, it's this. We like to know the details. We like to know the first time Norman Bates had impure thoughts about his mother, the first time Leatherface tasted the flesh, all that manner of malarkey. And why, ladies and gentlemen, do we need to know such precious minutiae? Well, here's a theory from the man at the Mondo. What we want is to find out what makes the blighters tick, you see? What makes those cogs turn? What peculiarity came about and said, right, it's Thursday morning, it's time to take to some schoolgirls with an axe. Because most of us don't do that, do we? So if we sit down and try and work out what caused Johnny to go absolutely blitzkrieg with some bit of kitchen implementary, maybe we'll work out the answer. And if we know the answer, then we'll have a solution, won't we? And the solution could be any number of things, and it could be a run, early morning run, getting the pipes going and the pulsating and such. It could be young Larry. Every Thursday finishes work, gets the Northern Line back to Angel, goes home past a particularly rugged kebab shop, where the usual youths mock him for his gait, for his posture, for his fear. And one day, after 2 years of this mocking, coming home to an ungrateful child, that formula, the formula of irritation, of humiliation, of repetition, drives a chap to go absolutely loco beans. And if we knew that equation, obviously we could put a stop to it. Perhaps young Albert would not have taken such a liking to the eating of the flesh. And if we were to learn that simply removing the repetition of the 39 bus from Putney Bridge to Southfield Station would have spared Aunt Matilda, then perhaps she would not have been giblets, or perhaps she would. It depends, of course, how you feel about Aunt Matilda. Is that not true? Now, this is a little bit of a special. We'll try something a little bit different with the Halloween special, because I have had some thoughts about this season, and it's all a bit banal, isn't it? It's all a bit Now don't get the chap wrong. One is terribly in love with the likes of Ash from The Evil Dead, Elvira, Leatherface, the whole pantheon, the ladies with the pumpkins out, the men brandishing their mighty sabers. It's a whole ritual. But it is something of a familiar ritual, like a Christmas for the Goths, if you will, and the horror types. And that's all well and good, but it's ultimately familiar and comfortable. There's a comfort that comes about when one sees the purple and the pumpkins and the spiders, all that. And Halloween is not to be about comfort, is it? It's to raise fear, strike dread into the hearts of a man. So tonight's show will be a catalogue of fear. Things that make your very Mondo General afeared himself, if you will. Now, we've already had 2 exercises in fear since the show started. One, of course, was screaming mediocrity. The audacity, if you will, to come to a camera and speak it possibly to the world, and merely list some purchases with no insight, no nothing, but here is a thing what I have purchased. That's merely cataloguing. That's not entertainment. That doesn't enthrall, entice, stimulate, engage. It's merely background noise of no more significance than the ticking clock. And I say fie. Fie upon mediocrity. Get thee on the stage, and if one can make a man from Glasgow laugh, then you've cracked it, Jim. But without the audience to say, sir, I apologize for my abruptness, but your recitations, they are merely tedious. That is a thing to fear. A world full of men simply reading out items like some kind of live Argos catalogue of the dull. The other thing, well, perhaps you'll work it out, perhaps you won't. True fear, of course, lies in the unknown, which is why, if one wishes not to deal with fear, then they deal very much in the known, in the familiar, in what can be discerned. And ultimately, to avoid fear, or to avoid being a frightening thing, one merely needs not to stand out, and sometimes one will dress in a conformist way, or speak in a form and a vernacular taken from the modern. And you see, apparently my FPS is too low. Well, I'll get a taller first-person shooter. I'll play dwarf with a lanky man. So, one arranges one's language. One uses the familiar terms. For example, tell me you have no imagination, without telling me you have no imagination. This is not a good look. And of course, the one that brings us to our first subject of the night. Go woke, go broke. Go woke, go broke. That's a common phrase amongst you Johnnies, isn't it? Now, I'm damned and dashed if I know what going woke entirely means in your brains. I'll take a wild guess. I'll take a swing and you can tell me if I've hit a 6 or bust my wickets, shall we? Let's just check the comments in case I am talking in complete silence, and all you see is a man talking. Right, well, there's no comments going on, so we shall carry on. I shall move the camera closer, because this leaning forward is not good for my posture. One does suffer from the damaged spine, you know, the damaged cartilage. So we're going broke. Common theory across your more conservative Johnnies is a bizarre idea that the inclusion, the representation of some of the less familiar races and sexual orientations in the funny books is in some way woke. And this intrigues me on 2 levels. One, it is of course poppycock. The sales of comics have not declined due to the inclusion of the less familiar. They have always been declining. That is a thing that can be tracked with sales charts. Any Johnny who understands numbers could tell you, sir, your sales, they do doth decline. Emphasis on decline. There have been few blips, and they are basically the bounces of a dead cat. The fact that the Wonder Woman may have been black, or Batman was black, or Superman's son turns out to be bisexual is neither here nor there, frankly. It's merely ammunition for the ignorant. So here's the second part that frightens me. Well, it worries me, is that why would the inclusion of, say, a bisexual Superman be in itself a political act? It is merely the representation of a sexual orientation that is obviously in existence, is it not? It is a thing that is there, it has been documented, there's no question of it. They are real, and even if they weren't bloody real, it's Superman. It's a thing about green rocks that turn you stupid, and flying elves, and 6-dimensional imps, and it's already nonsense. Are you truly to tell me that a man could run faster than a speeding locomotive, but could not enjoy a Johnny in his little fortress of solitude? I say thee nay. I say this is perfectly acceptable. But why would it be political? And I fear that it is a bastardization. Correct use of English, if you will. Do not call the censors of the concept. And I am coming to believe, quite frighteningly so, that anything that requires the recognition of the existence of one outside one's own social circle is now deemed political. It's a frightening concept, isn't it? Especially when the infrastructure we speak of is one based on heroics. And if there be any greater example of the social justice warrior, a being who sees the world outside themselves and chooses to act upon the injustice, what be it? Huh? Every superhero is a social justice warrior, unless they're very bad at it. So, that's how I feel about the whole Superman debacle. Hopefully most of the Johnnies having their little complaints, their little strops, crying to the little Comicsgate people. Hello, the Comicsgate people. How are you? Are you well? Have you learned to count outside using your fingers and toes yet? Have you? Well, good. I hope my continued existence does annoy you. It does provoke angry face emojis. You are a cancer upon the community, and hopefully you'll all form your own little compound and leave the rest of us alone. That'll be jolly nice. Bear that in mind. And then if you have your own little compound, of course, you don't have to invite anyone in you don't like. Just go and form your own island. And you can make lots of nice comics about nice white men that happen to be all white men. Not racism, just happenstance. And I suspect if we keep away from each other, we'll all be a lot happier. And all of the comic creators who I use as ammunition for the proof of validity, it couldn't be their own fault that they didn't turn in work on time, or wasn't very popular, or some of their ideas seemed a bit outmoded. No. It's obviously terrible conspiracy of the comics community who have nothing better to do than attempt to block comic creators from making comics. We're all that bored, you see. With nothing else to do, we're desperately trying to cancel you. Tricky one. How do we find the time, eh? So, we move from that element of fear, the fear of the unknown, if you're doing a list at home. Please do. Makes it more enthralling, like some kind of concept bingo, if you will. Is any Johnny watching this, I wonder? Well, I don't care about that, right? 16 minutes in, doing well. No deaths. Well, no deaths that I can see. People watch. Hello, the watchers of the show. Now, as you see, I am adrift from my usual base, so obviously some of the things have changed. There's not much bitterness, there's not anything to respond to, really. When one does not receive a message of any form, one simply carries on and does what one was going to do anyway, don't they? Anyway, now, for those of you playing Concept Fear Bingo, we've had 3 concepts elaborated upon. 2 have been named, and 1 is right in front of your eyes. And the first one that we come to using a comic to elaborate upon the concept, this would be the work of Rick Veitch, a fine man of good distinction and good breeding. Worked on a great many things, likes of Swamp Thing, Rabbit Fiends, 1963 for Image, and what was another good thing? Brat Pack, obviously. Here, the Max Immortal, that was quite good. There's a fine catalogue of work to be found by the man. Usually publishes his own work via the Amazon now. We're not fond of Amazon, but the man's got to put out his work somehow, and the comics industry doesn't seem particularly big enough for it. So Brat Pack, if you will, illustrates man's inhumanity to man, a theme we'll see many times tonight on this fine show, if you will. What happens in Brat Pack is the story of the superhero sidekick. Now, those of you familiar with more recent works upon this nature, such as The Boys by Mr. Garth Ennis, and young Gareth Robinson, and Peter Schneiberg, and other fine men, John McCrea, good boy, lovely boy. Now, what this Brat Pack thing is about is quite similar to The Boys. It is the behind the scenes, if you will. How does one become a superhero sidekick? Or what are the terms and conditions? What are the hours? What's the contract like? What's the audition present itself as? Well, Brat Pack takes you through that. A fine book from the 1980s, while not using the names of the likes of Captain America and Batman, Green Arrow and all those chappies, or Wonder Woman isn't in there if one takes one's meaning. Brat Pack does quite a good line in parody, if you will, satire. You'll get the references, I think. Now, this is a dark read. One would probably not want a pile of Batman and Robin around to read once one had read this, but it's certainly a fine bit of work. And let's see if we can find, well, see if the page is not going to get us thrown off the internet, what? Now, where are we? Where are we? Oh yes, of course. Now, this of course takes inspiration from the cruelty of the audience of comics. If one were to travel back in time, say 30 years or so, the main concern of the Batman comic would be the existence of young Jason Todd, a character designed to replace Dick Grayson in the Robin role. As Robin, Grayson, lovely Grayson, shut that door, was asked to leave, and he joined the Titans, and finally decided that perhaps wearing a pair of pants and elf shoes was not a thing befitting a young man. He became the Nightwing, don't you know? Blue and black, night, wings, no wings on the outfit. Trade Description Act, I think, yeah. Now, lovely boy, Dick. Jason was there to fill the void left by the absence of Dick, if you will. Ha! So, young Jason was a young street thug, very much the other end of the spectrum from young Dick. And, yes, an uncouth lad, possibly responsible for a spot of murder. Unpopular with the audience, and eventually DC saw the opportunity and said, well, not such a lovely boy. Throw him to the phones. And so, a poll happened, you see. The Joker went about with a crowbar around the body of young Jason Todd and his mother and set a bomb and left the whole thing on a cliffhanger, you see. You'd get to the end of the issue and you would ring up the DC on a premium number and you would vote whether young Jason would live or die. No word on his mother, but then rarely is in the comic books. Unless it's Martha, obviously, a special case. It's young Martha. And that Christians to the lions mentality of the whole exercise seemed to spark a concept in Mr. Veitch, and so we have Brat Pack. Highly recommend, 1 volume. Imagine would beg for a sequel. Quite a lot has happened with the concept of the young man and the young woman in the shadow of a mentor in the last 30 years, obviously. It could be good work. Brat Pack 2, Electric Boogaloo. Let's see if we can find a bit of course. Oh dear. Oh, no, you wouldn't, would you? Wouldn't take that to mother. Things would be said. Christmas cards cancelled, don't you know? Well, here you go, right? There's a creature, bang, its head. And, an unsubtle parody of the whole Batcave. Anyway, fine book, epitomizing the sacrifice of other humans merely to get ahead. Very relatable, one would think. Aha! Now, speaking of sacrifices and phraseology, of course, I've been sent a number of missives this week, concerning a closure, asking did I have anything to say on it. Several websites wanted to know did I have comments to make. Did I indeed? Why would I give it to you for free, a buffoon? Now how would one go about this without sounding coarse or bitter? One does not wish to be vulgar when broadcasting, don't you know? One will sum it as this, like so. The next step of the fear is, of course, the irrational. Now to you, unlearned viewer, who understands not what I do with these things,
This is merely a gold copy of Marville #1. Is it here to illustrate perhaps a poor showing of anatomy and the absolute gold to put this out of the world? Be a good point? No, actually in this case it isn't. It's merely one of an example. Then, of course, on the other end of the anatomical correctness, we have a Vampirella mashup with Faster Pussycat Kill by Butcher Billy, which was a variant cover to an issue of Vampirella. It's very lovely, isn't it? Very lovely. And then the final bit, of course, much under-publicised, I think, fine bit of work. Perhaps some of the team were a bit ungentlemanly in their conduct, but fine little book called The Suicide Girls, based on, of course, the young ladies and the things of the same name. And this, of course, is a variant cover. It's a very good cover because it features a young lady in some of her underthings. But once again, the denominator, the common one in all three of these items is the variant. And what is frightening, as I say, about all that is the realm of the irrational. Now, why is it irrational? Well, there are a variety of ways one can obtain a variant cover, of course. If you are a retailer, it would be offered to you as a vote for joining in with a meeting, or perhaps you do a signing and the chappie doing the signing is given some special covers to give to you as a thank you for hosting them. Or, of course, the most common way is to order them. Now, these books here, of which I have just demonstrated, were not common. They could not simply be obtained by ticking a yes in a form. One had to qualify for them. How did one qualify? Well, I'm glad you asked, lovely boy. One qualified, of course, by ordering a certain amount of the comic book. So, should one, say, ordered 30 copies, 29 be a regular Johnny, and number 30 would be your irregular Johnny. And the irregular Johnny could, of course, be sold for a premium simply because it is rare. Now, it is the irrational that is the key factor here. Because once upon a time, when common sense prevailed, a system known as the cycle sheet was in use. See, and what one would do is one would count the amount of comics one received, and then they would check how many had sold in the first week, and then do it again for the second week, and then do it again for the third week. And should it be that you, say, had 12 copies left over after your third week of sale, you had ordered 12 copies too many, hadn't you? So you, like a clever blighter, would say, well, that's a waste of money, it's a waste of space. You drop the order by 12, none's the worse, really. And what this ratio-based incentive cover was designed to do was to make you ignore your sales figures, to ignore the tangible proof of your own work, and simply say, I will order more than I need for a short-term gain. Now, if one really knew what one was doing, one could conceivably gamble a few times a year and perhaps come up even, because you still pay for the copies you don't sell, even if you do sell the variant, you see. So if you had 12 left over to achieve the variant, you still have those 12 left over. Now, if you would, imagine repeating that process for every single Marvel comic, every DC comic, every Image comic, every Dark Horse comic, every Boom comic, every Oni comic, every Dynamite, every Humanoids. One gets the picture. And just imagine, one had been doing this since just after the turn of the century. And if we were to guess fairly, we were to say each item that had not sold had cost you about £1. It's not. It's more, but let's just say it's pound, right? And those items that don't sell have to go somewhere, so you put them into a long box. Now, a long box will take about 300 comics. Unbagged, unboarded, 300 of these unsold Johnnies. And after a couple of years, you'd accumulate a few boxes, and after 5 years, a few more. And a decade, and nearly 2 decades. What you have is an ordering system that ignores tangible data and leaves you with hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of unsold comics taking up your space, eating up your cash flow that could have been spent, perhaps paying bills, paying staff, paying rates. But instead it's all tied up in those boxes, isn't it? And the money you got from the variants long, long gone. So I suppose one's comment is now you are one more cautionary fable to the danger of variants, and very little more. Sorry about your damn luck, sir. On to the next concept. Those of you who are regulars to the Facebook page may notice the running rivalry about the nature of digital comics that I have with a comrade, David Lloyd. One may get the wrong impression from the harshness of the words that we sling upon each other that there is a genuine dislike, and it is not true. In truth, Mr. Lloyd is a visionary, genius, a bold man who takes no gump from any man alive, by God, and this gentleman here of the Mondo respects him greatly for a number of his works. And if one is not subscribed to Aces Weekly, a digital comic available regularly, in fact weekly, then one should be, shouldn't they? You should amend that and tell him, by golly, the Mondo FunnyBooks sent you. And of course, how did we get David Lloyd? Well, one that was a delinquent, wasn't he? Did not like the time at the old school, went to the library, borrowed a book, and, unfortunately, it was a prophetic book, you see. It's a book called V for Vendetta. I imagine most, if not all of you watching this will be familiar with it. You should be. It's one of the greatest works in the history of the medium. What? How dare you not have read it? Read it now. No, read it later. I'm live. Come back. Right. So, why is V a representation of fear? Well, here's the thing. It's a rum old do. V's very prophetic. See, V is prophetic because there are a great many things to be feared in V. The coldness, the isolation, the lack of humanity, the basic brutalization of the common man in the name of practice and standard, you see. And what's most telling, the most fearful of the notions is it was all optional. It was all optional. The people in V for Vendetta were not taken over by a hostile dictatorship. There were no space aliens proffering edicts from an uncaring world. No. The processes for which they are subject are entirely of their own decision. One may draw parallels to the world from this. One could not possibly comment, because obviously there's no room for realistic social commentary in comics. That's crazy woke speak, don't you know? And obviously wokeness is a thing that only happened in the last few years. Social awareness, that happened last Tuesday and not before, you communist. And that's the truly frightening thing about V, is how prophetic it is. How we end up in a state of fear and shortage and degradation and all manner of dehumanization no reason but our own fault. Our own desire not to get involved with the issues, to hide our head in the sand, bury our face in whatever escapism that has no context beyond itself. And these showed us what would come to be, and by golly, it certainly bloody did. Some of the prophecies were a bit off, but take in mind this is being serialized in Warrior quite a while back, long before anybody had heard of Mr. Farage or Mr. Johnson. It has something of the 1984 about it, doesn't it? And all of it was, is, option, and remains such. For now, anyway. So they take that away from us. Tick-tock, as they say. The next book. This is an odd example. It's an odd example because I have a thing to explain that one's own taste will not allow one to purchase the thing that would explain the taste. Difficult, I know. Now, it seems to have a comment. Let's see what the comment is. Hello, the Harvey boys. Lovely boys, lovely boys. Now, for me, the thing I'm about to show you is representative of what one would call the opening of Pandora's box. Beginning of the end, if you will. The realization of a formula that could be exploited. Unfortunately, I don't have the real thing, so you'll have to go with as close a representation as one could possibly find, and one only purchased them, you see, as a state of incredulity, if you will. Astonishment of the hubris. And this would be this. This would be the issue of Marvel Age that previews the beginning of the end. Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. A comic by Mr. Jim Shooter designed entirely to advertise some action figures, but written with such hubris and memos to one's own creative staff to say, make sure the little fucks are aware that this is where they'll find the real Spider-Man, the real X-Men. Make that clear in the letters pages. Yeah, Chris Claremont, it's 1986. This tall man says to you, this is where you find the real X-Men, and Chris Claremont bloody saved Marvel with the X-Men. It's a bit much, a bit off. Not cricket, is it? It's just bloody rude. But here the formula was perfected, you see. 12 issues of a core storyline happened here. It span out, affected the other books. Had the little Secret Wars logo on it, so the little fox would know, oh, I need to buy this. It's a part of a Secret Wars story. The next year, Crisis on Infinite Earths happened. 12 issues, don't you know, and affected the entire universe, and had a little logo on it to say, you should buy this, you little fuck, it's part of the whole thing. And so our fate was sealed, dear readers, because year after year, another Secret Wars, another Crisis, another Legends would be foisted upon the audience, and one bigger event, and this time a new costume, or a broken leg, or a broken car. Something to get a little fox involved. Spend all your money, it's all important. Until the year 2000, where it wasn't important. You should buy this, we're going to end something serious, and in 2 years we'll undo it. She-Hulk is dead, is she? No, welcome back, Shulk. Captain America's been murdered, has he? No, he's back, he's reborn. Buy that, you little fox. And for me, that's the beginning of the end, the beginning of the nightmare, you see. The poison in the veins. If one wished to say there was a decline to be tracked, it is not from the bisexuality of your man from Krypton. It is the avarice that sees the audience like one collection of cash machines that simply needs the right buttons to be pushed to extract the maximum amount of money. And should those little cash machines go away, then you just ask for more money out of the remaining cash machines, until there are no cash machines. And that's the fault of the Muslim superhero, is it? Not decades of formula, of exploitation, of writing for nothing. No purpose. Decompression, expansion, the swerve. No point, no themes, no relation. What does it mean to you that the Hulk's dead? He's not now, is he? If the Hulk can die, but now he's not dead, then why bother? That's where everyone went, you see. Woke. Fools. Now, we bring you to the penultimate point. Another one of my favorites, a writer referenced earlier in the show. Preacher, written by Garth Ennis, an Irishman. We'll not hold that against him. But, drawn by the delightful Steve Dillon, God rest his soul, covers by memorable Glenn Fabry. Certainly an anecdote generator if you're on the convention circuit, that's for sure. Now, Preacher, for the uninitiated, concerns us with young Jesse Custer, the man in the middle here. An alcoholic preacher, at the end of his rope, his self-esteem of a worm, preaching to his local town under strict jurisdiction of his own family. Then one day, struck with literally the voice of God, a voice that demands absolute obedience, and he decides to use this gift to realize that if there is a voice of God, then quite clearly there must tangibly be a God. And this God, this big Johnny in the sky, has been very quiet for quite a long time, almost since the beginning of recorded media. And young Jesse would like a little word about what the bally fuck he thinks he's doing. And he is accompanied by his friend, the alcoholic Irish vampire, young Cassidy, and his ex-girlfriend, the assassin Tulip. It's quite a rollicking read. There's all kinds of degradation, disgustingness, the sort of thing that Tipper Gore was designed for, like a collection of Mary Whitehouse's little wet dreams she never told her husband or her congregation. But what's beneath Preacher, beyond the amusement, beyond the sex detectives and the fish fucking and the leg slicing, is of course the point. And the point is this: for Jesse to have become a preacher would have taken the desires of his father, of his family. It is his family who decide that it is perfectly justifiable to continue generation upon generation of traditional torture, psychological punishment, for the sake of a theory. Unquestioningly, a theory. This is what we do. We listen to the words of little men who have no evidence, merely volume. And we do great nastiness to each other for nothing. And that is the core of Preacher. And in the end, of course, however you interpret the ending, I believe there are two, and I have my own theories and friends have their others, but in both instances the wisest thing seems to be to simply walk away from the whole Bally affair. It's difficult to disagree, really. So yes, that's that particular fear. The unquestioning obedience of the masses. That would get you every time. And the final fear of the evening. The fear that drives the show, if you will. One does not believe one is particularly intelligent, well-read, articulate. One would not call themselves a historian or a scholar because one, frankly, does not have the balls, the audacity, to suggest anything more than a fleeting knowledge of the medium, you see. It's too much. It's too much to be assimilated. But one is struck with the realization that one is aware of things, and a great many simply do not know. Seems unlikely, but that is the state of affairs one finds themselves in, don't you know? Now, this is what drives one, you see. Here at Mondo HQ, we are aware that your man talking to you now is an idiot, knows nothing, little, a pebble, the dust on a pebble in the Grand Canyon of what there is to be known. And yet somehow, the things we do know are uncommon in the general conversation of the funny book medium. The works of Hagar, of Harriman, not as important to the average Johnny as a grade of a Walking Dead slabbed one. Madness. Price of everything and the value of nothing, as they say. So the final fear is extemporized and elaborated upon of these two books. First one is The Essential Howard Duck. Now, one exploits the hashtags, obviously, because most of you wouldn't have known of Howard the Duck from his appearance in the Guardians of the Galaxy, and there's a new Guardians of the Galaxy electronic entertainment out this week. Not so many know it was written by Steve Gerber. Not many people know of Steve Gerber. Done under 40, except for a select few, and probably then in a kind of I knew this because I read it on the fandom. Perhaps when it's harsh. But one assumes not. And it seems that to value the object over the author is a grand mistake. A great tragedy. Because these are not, they're not symbols of investment. They're not assets to be liquefied. These are the collections of people's feelings of the world, interpreted into the form of the comic. Especially a man like Gerber, who documents his own nervous breakdown via a bloody talking duck. Genius. And the other book, I mentioned for a friend, as it happens, as I instructed them that they should learn more about this man, but with no real direction of how she ought to go about it. This is one of one's favourite books. This is a book called Eisner Miller. Will Eisner and Frank Miller, for the uninitiated. Now, Frank Miller, obviously quite a famous chappie. Won't be up in Leeds this weekend, but, yeah, done a few bits and pieces quite significant. And there's Will Eisner, probably one of the most significant Americans to touch the art form ever. Helped Shooter and so much work. It seems insulting to attempt to try and sum it up in this video, you know. Unfortunately, if one attempts to bring up Will Eisner, the most common talking point would be the spirit. And then someone will chime in with, I saw the Spirit movie and it was balls. Like, well, no sir, it was not balls, it was fantastic. If one wanted a Frank Miller Spirit movie, then one got one. Unfortunately, what people really wanted was a movie by Will Eisner about the Spirit, and unfortunately, the chap had passed away. This book is a collection of the two men conversing about the medium, how they choose to draw, what formats, trying to collate as much as they possibly could in terms of history and their own idiosyncrasies and takes on it, sharing anecdotes. The continual argument one has in one's head is, of course, what does the Mount Rushmore of the comics look like? And there's never a firm answer, but a Mount Rushmore that did not incorporate the work and the teachings and the learnings of Eisner would be a poor one indeed. And that is what one fears the most, you see. Not Mount Rushmore, that's madness. But the absence. As time passes, everything fades into the ether. Reams and reams of what was once vital information becomes merely dusty nostalgia. Everything gets piled into yellowing books, and nobody sits back and says, I wonder what the Spirit was like. I wonder what else was going on in the newspapers strips at the same period of the Spirit. What is there to be learned there? It all just dissipates as the things become out of central circulation. Like the Library of Alexandria, voluntarily destroyed, but nobody really knows who set the fire first. So that is the fear that drives this very show, ladies, gentlemen, and the others amongst you who choose your own denomination of identification, of which Mondo FunnyBooks entirely requests and respects. It is a desire against the void to keep the light on these here Mondo FunnyBooks. Now, this of course has been Mondo FunnyBooks. I have been your host, Filthy Nevs, and Season 2, Episode 2 will be amongst you all very shortly, so we wish you a very happy Halloween here at Mondo Headquarters. Be well, be good, of course, one cannot be good. One should endeavor to never, ever get caught. Be well, and say hello to your mother for me.